So we definitely didn't know this going into the theater, but this movie was directed by the guys that did the remake of Vacation. Don't worry, these are definitely very different films. Game Night was directed by John Francis Daly and Jonathan Goldstein and stars Jason Bateman, Rachel McAdams, and Kyle Chandler. This is a comedy about a group of friends who get together to have a game night, and when one of them decides to hire a murder mystery company, things start to get a little crazy, and they can't tell what's real and what's not.
Right, guys, so I'm not going to sugarcoat this at all. This is hands down one of the funniest movies I've seen in years, like probably since 2016's Popstar. It was absolutely hilarious, just beginning to end. There were jokes all the way through, and very rarely did they ever feel out of place. And that's one thing that I really appreciated about this movie, is the fact that they focused on the story and not on the comedic elements. That's usually the biggest issue with comedy movies nowadays, is that they go out of their way to make a joke. But this movie never feels like it does that. The comedy flows really well, and the whole thing just worked. Now, I think the cast here was absolutely excellent. Nobody here felt out of place. Jason Bateman and Rachel McAdams, I thought, did phenomenal as the two arguably lead roles in the movie. And then I want to give out a special shout out to Jesse Plemons, who plays Todd in Breaking Bad. This is the funniest role I have ever seen him in. Every single scene he was in was incredible. I didn't know he could pull this off, and he did a fantastic job at it. And I also have to mention just the overall feel of this movie. Now, between like the cinematography and the soundtrack, this felt very different from a lot of comedies. It had kind of this futuristic kind of sounding like soundtrack that went with it, courtesy of the guy who was in charge of the soundtrack to Drive, which, if you haven't seen that movie, go watch it. It's incredible. But then the cinematography was really, really cool. There were a couple of shots that almost made it seem like they were playing in a board game, and they intentionally did like these aerial shots that made the whole area just seem fake, and I thought it was so cool. But I think the thing that this movie does the most right at is just the fact that it's a fun movie. It's a movie that you can just sit down and just kind of watch and just appreciate it for what it is. There are definitely some parts that aren't great, but I just enjoyed myself. There really wasn't a moment that I was like, okay, let's get this moving, or like, that wasn't funny, that shouldn't have been there. The whole thing just kind of worked. And it was so refreshing to see that in a comedy, because it's been so long since we have seen that.
So this movie really is just a fun, enjoyable time at the movies. There are some minor flaws that we had with it, but I kind of feel like I'm just mentioning nitpicks, because overall it is just a very enjoyable movie. So first off, Chris and I both agree that the plot was kind of predictable. You could kind of see where it was going. There were a few surprises in there, but for the most part, if you've seen a lot of movies, you'll know where this movie is headed. Also, something that Chris and I kind of disagreed on is there was a subplot involving Rachel McAdams and Jason Bateman that I felt was kind of unnecessary. He didn't really mind it, and it really is not a deal breaker, but I thought I should mention it. And definitely, this isn't a movie that you're going to go in and analyze for years to come, but it's just a fun, enjoyable comedy movie, and I definitely think it's worth seeing.
Alright guys, so all in all, I really enjoyed Game Night. I think for what it was trying to be, it succeeded in almost every aspect. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.
I was definitely entertained for the entire runtime of this movie. I think that if you like comedies or just want a fun, lighthearted time at the movies, you should definitely give Game Night a try. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. So thanks so much for watching. If you liked what we had to say, leave a like and a subscribe. It really helps us out. If you didn't agree with what we had to say, leave a dislike and tell us why in the comments. Thanks so much for your support.
Thanks, guys.